There we go.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Liz Fenton. I'm missing my better half today, Lisa Steinke, who is on a road trip and she's in the middle of Nevada with no cell service right now, so she's not going to be here today. But we're so excited to be here. She and I are best friends. We're also the co-authors of 7 novels, including How to Save a Life, which just came out on July 14th, which you can purchase autographed copies of that or a backlist at Warwick's. Right, Julie?
Yep, there you go. That's my cue.
That's your cue.
And I'll be putting the buy links for Liz and Lisa's book and Claire's book in the chat feature. So please, if you are so inclined to hit those links and buy from us, that would be wonderful. Just a few quick things for those of you. I see lots of people who are here with us regularly, so my apologies. You hear this from me every time you come on, but got to give Warwick's the plug. Warwick's is located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. We are open for business. If you're in the area and you want to come browse books, no better place to do it. Mass social distancing. So we've got lots of great books for you to look at there, but also the other side of the store that has all of the gifts and jewelry and everything. So please come by and shop with us. But if you'd rather stay home and order online, any way you can get a book, you can get it from Warwick. So online, call us, pick it up curbside, whatever you'd like to do. Also do a couple things. Go to our website and sign up for the email list, because that will let you know we've got a pretty good fall already lined up with some good authors. So you might want to check out what we've got going on. And the couch surfing, we couldn't do it without Liz and Lisa. And so Liz, it's on you tonight. So have a great conversation. Claire, thank you for being here. It's good to see you.
It's an absolute pleasure. You know, I'm a huge fan of your store, and I can't be here in person, so it's really nice to have this as the next best thing.
I know, and Liz, you'll have to ask her what time it is there.
Oh, I know. Yeah, you guys, Claire is joining us from the UK. Claire, tell us what time it is there.
So it is just gone midnight. I just put I put the kids to bed earlier, and then my husband went to bed. And I went up with him, and he was getting ready for bed and doing his teeth, and I was putting some lipstick on and got out of my scruffs and put a dress on, and did my hair a little bit, and then came downstairs. And normally I would do these sorts of events from my office, but my office is right across the hall from my bedroom. So I thought that might disturb my husband. So I'm downstairs in the kitchen, trying not to make too much noise.
Well, we're so happy you're here, and thank you for being up in the middle of the night. That's dedication, and we appreciate it. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Claire, and then we'll get started. We'll put her in the hot seat. So Clare Mackintosh is the New York Times and #1 international best-selling author. I Let You Go, I See You, and Let Me Lie, translated into more than 35 languages and with more than 2 million copies sold worldwide. She's the founder of the Chipping Norton Literary Festival and is the patron of the Silver Star Society, an Oxford-based charity that provides special care for mothers with medical complications during pregnancy at John Radcliffe Hospital. She lives in North Wales with her husband and their 3 children. Her paperback edition of After the End was published on June 16th. 2020, right? June 16th came out, right? Well, we're so happy you're here. So the Daily Mail had this to say about After the End. This stunning book is something of a departure for best-selling thriller writer Mackintosh, who questions what it costs to stand up for what you believe in. Can you tell us what it's about?
Yeah, I can. So After the End, this is what it looks like for you guys. It's about a couple, Max and Pip, who are really strong. They really love each other, but they've got a son, and I guess they love their son more, and they would do anything for their son. And when he becomes very ill, they have to make a decision about his future, about his quality of life, about what's more important, keeping him alive with a diminished quality of life or saying goodbye to him. And they disagree. So this is a book that I've wanted to write for a really long time. In 2006, I was in intensive care with my own son who was critically ill. and my husband and I were asked to make a decision about whether we wanted to keep fighting for our son or whether it was time to turn off the machines. And I asked the doctor what would happen if we disagreed, because like most couples, we had all sorts of disagreements and none of them ever mattered before. But here was something that mattered more than anything in the whole world, and about which there could be no compromise at all. And the doctor said, you have to agree, because the alternative is unthinkable. So After the End is a book about the unthinkable. It's not my story, it's a novel, but it's about a couple who are torn apart by wanting the best for their son.
Yeah, I was reading, I was internet stalking you this week, and I was reading about your story and part of the inspiration for the book, and you said something that I thought was so beautiful that I wrote down when you were talking about the book. You said, the story broke my heart all over again, but it mended it too, and I finally made peace with our decision. None of us can predict the future, but we can shape it as it happens. We can choose to live again. So was there some healing in writing this for you?
Yeah, there was. So it was a very difficult book to write, because although it's not my story, I was drawing on my emotion and my experience. But so I was a police officer for a long time. I was a police officer for 12 years before I was a writer. And when you are a police officer, you learn, I think, to compartmentalize your feelings. And it's a really important skill to have, because you see things that are terrible and you don't want to take home to your family. And I became very, very good at locking away parts of what I'd seen and what I'd experienced. And I think what happened is that skill extended to my own life. And so when Alex became sick and later when he died, I didn't confront my grief. I compartmentalized it. I had to, because he had a twin who needed my focus and my attention. And so I locked it all away. And then when I came to write After the End, in order to write authentically about this couple, not just about the trauma that they'd experienced, but the way they'd lived through it, the hope that they'd found afterwards, I had to unlock those feelings. And that was a really difficult thing to do, in the same way as I imagine going to therapy and perhaps, going over painful experiences would be difficult to do. But the net result, as therapy is as well, is that it felt very healing as a result. And when I'd finished the book, because specifically the book deals with the aftermath, so the title is After the End. It of course it deals with this crisis, but it's really, the focus is on what happens afterwards. It's how we move forward from a difficult situation. And so as I traveled that journey with Max and Pip, I felt better and I felt more at peace with myself.
That's good. That's beautiful. It's funny, you're kind of leading me, because my next question was about your past as a former police officer. It's like you're reading my mind. I'm really curious how that experience plays into your novels in general. I mean, I've got to imagine that plays a role.
Yeah, it does. And so before I wrote After the End, I wrote thrillers. And I think there is perhaps an assumption that the greatest gift that my police experience gives me is a whole sort of a menu of crimes that I can pick and choose from. And actually that isn't the best part about my experience as a police officer. The best part is the people watching. It's the 12 years of insight into how people live, how they behave under pressure, how they deal with a crisis, because police officers pretty much only deal with people in a position of crisis. They've either just been a victim of crime, or they've just witnessed a crime, or they've just committed a crime. And that sort of heightened tension is a really interesting situation for a writer, or an aspiring writer, as I was then. And so a lot of that experience, I think, sort of finds its way into my writing. And particularly with After the End, although it's not a crime thriller, it hasn't got a police procedural element, it does have a doctor in it who sort of performs the role that my detectives perform in my thrillers. So Layla is the Iranian consultant who looks after Dylan, who is Pip and Max's son. And I think when I was writing her sections, I was really thinking about all the cases that I dealt with as a police officer, and the way that I would have to work really hard to not take those home. And the way that I remember some of them, even now, even 20 years on. And so the way that Layla reacts to her work as a hospital doctor is perhaps very much based on how I was as a police officer.
Fascinating. I read this really funny thread today. You posted on Twitter. You didn't post it today, but in my research, that you talked about authenticity in crime novels and all the unrealistic things that are said, and it was great. I mean, can you give us a few? Because I don't know if you remember. I can't remember how long ago.
I do. No, I do. I remember it. I remember it really, really well. I just before I do that, I'm just very conscious that I'm drinking wine and it's 4 o'clock where you are, and you probably think, is the word lush? Is that an American word? If I say I must drink a lush,
it is cocktail hour somewhere.
Yeah,
is it, okay.
It's 4 o'clock is wine time in California, girl.
Oh,
Especially
okay. I should probably be having
all day. Yeah, in quarantine, it's like airport rules. You can drink whenever you want.
Oh, that's great. Okay, I'm very relieved. So yeah, I remember that Twitter thread really well, because I was really, you know how sometimes you just get full of rage about something that really doesn't matter. And I had read or watched something that was so badly researched in terms of what police officers do. And actually, it's not the big things that wind me up. So I don't really care if people take liberties in their crime fiction. You know, we're writing novels. We're not writing manuals. It would be desperately boring if we described exactly how a crime is investigated. What winds me up is the way people talk to each other. And so I see this a lot in British crime fiction. They very much base their police officers on things they've seen on television. And so a lot of British crime writers will have their police officers speaking in a very formal way, and they'll call each other by their surnames. You know, they'll say, "Parker, hand me that pen," which is so ridiculous, because I've never ever spoken to anyone like that in my police career. You know, we use first names. We don't say, "Sergeant, what time is it?" We just talk like normal colleagues. So that winds me up a lot. The other thing that winds me up is British police officers having ready access to guns, which just isn't a thing that we do. You know, British police are not armed. There's a small department that are armed, but you certainly can't just walk up to a police station and check out a gun and take it home. And, you know, it's all quite strict in the UK. And what else do they do? They're always mavericks, aren't they? They always go off on their own and break rules and interrogate suspects without arresting them. I find it very frustrating. But what was interesting about that Twitter thread was hearing from all the other professions about what wound them up. So the lawyers and the teachers and, you know, all the people whose professions are have liberties taken with them in fiction. So I think we're all in the same boat, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I I was a pharmaceutical rep for 20 years, and anytime there's any drug rep on any, it's always like some 6 foot tall. I mean, and she's like, it's crazy. Or people think it's like love and other drugs. And I'm like, no, we weren't having orgies like with the doctors. But anyway, I digress.
You just
Julie, I
worked
think we have
at the wrong store, you know? Maybe you were just hanging out with the wrong colleagues.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I would have sold more drugs that way.
Or the wrong kind of drugs.
Yeah, seriously. The illegal ones.
Or the ones that everybody wants illegally, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, there's a question from the audience. Vicky has a question. It kind of goes a little bit to what you're saying, because I think that there is, even though you're writing novels and you're writing fiction, you still have things that you want to keep, some semblance of reality in it. But her question is, what's the most difficult thing about writing?
Oh, good question, Vicky. So I reckon Liz and I can both chip in on this one. Apart from the obvious one, which is the words, actually writing them. For me, the most difficult thing is setting the premise of it, the concept of the story. What's the big question? So in after the end, the big issue, the big question is the fact that this couple don't agree. In one of my thrillers, I Let You Go, the big issue was how do we move on from a horrific hit and run that's killed a child. So once I've got that concept set, then I can start shaping the story. But quite often I'm flailing around. And right now, actually, I'm flailing a little bit with my 6th book and trying to work out what is it that I'm actually talking about. I know the characters, I know the setting, I know a few things that happen, but what's the point of this story? What's the message? So for me, that's the hardest thing. How about you?
Do you have, sorry. Do you have
no,
readers?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Do I have what, Julie?
Do you have so when you're having those kind of things, do you have friends that you kind of give the pages to and help, or do you just do it all on your own?
No, well, I don't start writing until I know what the thing is, what the concept, the point of the novel is. So right now I have I've got these giant Post-it notes. Do you call them Post-it notes, sticky notes? Mm-hmm. Huge grey things, and I have them up on my wall with bits of story on them, and every day I'm kind of sticking more bits on, and so I'm still at the really early stages, and I wouldn't start writing until I've really nailed that premise, that big question. And then once I start writing, I won't show anyone anything until the first draft is finished. But it's a rough first draft. It's pretty bad by the end. It needs knocking into shape. But Liz, tell me, what's the hardest thing about writing for you?
I mean, I think Lisa and I would probably have different answers. I mean, I do think, you're talking about it is really important to have know the narrative question of your novel, because it really is almost like a North Star as you're writing. And if you don't have it, it's very easy to get lost. I think for me, I would say probably the middle of the book is difficult. I'm really good in the beginning, and I'm really good once you hit the climax going to the end. And I think one of Lisa's strengths is actually plotting through what can be a sagging middle. So we have the advantage of having 2 people. So if I'm terrible at something, she's typically very good at it, and vice versa. So between the 2 of us, we're almost one person.
So do you plot out your books before you start writing?
No, it depends. I mean, we've written suspense, and we plot that out much more, just because I just think it lends, you've really got to know. But when we're writing magical realism or, women's fiction, we usually just a 3-act play. This is, how it starts out, this is the climax, this is the end. And then we only plot about 4 or 5 chapters at a time. How about you? Are you a plotter or pantser?
Well, I think that's really interesting because that sort of cements what I've been thinking about my own process. So I have always been a plotter, and my suspense novels, my crime thrillers, were really, really well plotted before I started writing. But I didn't do that for After the End. I didn't need to do that. What I needed to do for After the End was know who these characters were. And once I knew, and I really had to work on knowing who they were and where they came from, what their values were, and so what decisions they would make and how they would react to them. But it was the characters that led the story. And I guess characters that lead that sort of genre, the women's fiction, romance, perhaps magical realism. Is it perhaps the world that really leads the narrative there?
Yeah, I mean, then it would definitely fall under like a women's fiction or commercial fiction. But you're right. I think that you can be a little more loose with those. You can be a little more organic, I think, with your plot. I think with suspense, like when you're dropping those hints that you know, so when someone looks back on what happened, they're like, oh yeah, like you really have to know what you're doing along the way and not give away too much, but it can't be out of left field. Like, oh, it was John. Like, you know, and they're like,
John was never there before.
John just shows up and he's like, you know.
I think if I don't plot my crime novels, so I've just written a crime novel that's coming out next year, that's a thriller set on a long haul flight. So it's an airplane locked room, and it needed so much plotting. And if I had to do a fair amount of rewriting anyway, but if I hadn't have plotted it, I would have had so much rewriting to do to kind of seed all those red herrings and lead people the way I wanted to lead them. So I think it's definitely that difference between plot-led and character-led.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that kind of leads me to my next question. So when we come up with a book, we always come up with a concept or the plot first, and then we move to characters. And I'm curious if that's the same for you, or do you come up with a character and then build a plot around it? And it does depend what genre you're writing in. For us, it's always the same regardless of genre.
I think it actually just depends on the book. So I'm going to kind of ignore my first novel in a way, because I think debuts are slightly different, because your debut is just the book that you want to write. You're not thinking genre, you're not thinking career, you're not thinking anything really. That's just a book that you want to write. And so I Let You Go was what it was, and it turned out to be a psychological suspense novel. With I See You, so I See You was my second novel, and it's suspense, and it was it's a high concept novel, and so the premise of it came first, and it came about because I was taking a train to. I'm not an urbanite. I live in the country. I don't like cities particularly, and I was travelling on the Underground, the London Underground, the Tube, with a friend, and she moved me. We were waiting on the platform, and she made me move like 5-6 steps to the right so that we would be in line with the train when it came in. So the doors would open exactly where we were standing. And she did that because she was a regular commuter and she knew exactly where to stand to get a seat. And as I looked around, I saw that all these commuters that did this day in, day out knew exactly where to stand. They kind of knew which direction to face. They picked up a free newspaper without even looking at it. They were all creatures of habit. And so the book originated from that concept that commuters are creatures of habit, and we do the same thing day in, day out because it's familiar and it feels safe. But that familiarity, that predictability puts us at risk. So that was the starting point for the novel. And I kind of didn't need anything else. That I sort of knew how the story was going to unfold. But then with After the End, it was very much character, that although I knew the critical issue that this couple were facing, I actually didn't know what was going to happen with it. I just knew that the two of them had this horrific decision to make, and that they weren't going to agree. And so I spent much more time thinking about who they were and what sort of education path they'd had, and who their parents were, and what their values were. And so that was a very different process. But then I've just written this airplane thriller. And again, that's a high concept novel. So the starting point for that was, in fact, it was a long haul flight I took to San Francisco last year with my family. So, like, I love long haul flights. I really, really do. I'm just
not with the family.
Slight digression. Well, this is, do you know what I worked out? Because I've always said, oh, I love long haul. I actually love long haul when I'm on my own and I'm ideally business class. And then, frankly, I would just fly on a permanent loop. Yeah, flying economy for 13, 14 hours with my 3 children, one of whom has autism and struggles to be in a confined space, was not an enjoyable experience. But anyway, while I was on that flight, what I was thinking was, this is so weird. We're all strangers. We're all living through the equivalent of a whole day. You know, like, people are we're up in the air. People are going to work. They're coming back from work. They're going to sleep. They're waking up again. Like, they're having whole lives. And we've got no idea, because we're suspended in this weird world. And I was talking afterwards to a pilot friend of mine, and she said airplanes they're like cities, cities in the sky. And in any city, people live and people die. And it was such a brilliant line. And so I wanted to write this high concept thriller that's entirely set on a long haul flight. So I've got this 20-hour flight from London to Sydney, and there's nowhere to run. And I love that locked room. It's quite sort of Murder on the Orient Express. That something terrible is happening, but you can't go anywhere.
Right.
So that's a very, very long answer to a very short question. So I guess it depends on the book, whether it's the concept or the characters. But I'm a real fan of high concept books.
Do you want me to go to the chat?
Really quick, I was going to say that's interesting, because when I flew to Sydney a couple years ago, I actually had a very similar thought. It was a 14-hour flight, and I'm like, man, the whole world could like blow up while we're on and like we'd land, and it's just like, oh, California blew up, like, it's such a, you are in such like a confined space, and I was thinking, yeah, that is an interesting concept. So I cannot wait to read that. I think that is a fascinating concept. So Julie, did we have questions?
Well, I think you actually answered it, because it was how you get your inspiration for your plots, or for your books. And this one obviously is about, from your own life and the thrillers, and she wanted to know. But my question too with it is that, how's it going from character driven to the crime procedure? Do you like making the switch? Does that what keeps you like motivated, or making that switch back and forth?
I think it has. I think writing after the end, which is a bit of an anomaly, really. It's an outlier, in that I had 3 suspense novels, and then after the end, and now I've got more suspense novels. What it's done is it's made me want to include more character in my suspense novels. So I already, I hope I write fleshed out 3D characters in my suspense novels. They're not just plot. But I'm just starting my 6th novel at the moment, the one that I'm kind of flailing around a little bit. And it is a crime thriller novel. But I've noticed already that I'm really thinking about who my police lead is. I already feel like I know this woman. I'm setting it in rural North Wales, where I live, in Snowdonia in the mountains. And I'm yeah, I'm approaching it in a slightly different way. So I think that each of my books is feeding into the next in a way, which I guess is, you know, is to be expected. If you work in any job, you should get better, shouldn't you? You should be learning from each project that you undertake, whether you're working in IT or finance or whether you're writing books. And so I'm definitely learning and growing with each novel.
Yeah,
And
and
then,
we're like that too. Oh, sorry. I was going to say that I think we learn something from every novel. And I think especially when you're working with great editors and a great publishing team, you know, those voices kind of are stuck in your head in the next novel. Like maybe some mistake you kept making in the like that. I'll have that voice in my head as I'm writing, like, no, don't do that, don't. Like, and I start typing it, and it's I can hear her voice in my head, like with a little note on the side.
And do you, Liz, do you read back through your early novels and like cringe?
Yeah, sometimes, you know, Lisa never reads them at all. Occasionally I'll go back through and I'm like, oh, did we write this? Like, it just feels like someone else wrote it, or I can't even remember like what she wrote versus I wrote, which we have the worst memory. We can never remember anyway by the time it's published. I have no idea who wrote what, but yeah, I mean, I do think there's so much growth. I think you learn so much when you're working with a great team. And also when you're switching genres back and forth, because we've done the same thing. And I do think that it teaches a lot of valuable lessons.
It does. And I think also that if you're writing different genres, you tend to be reading different genres. And actually, we should all be doing that anyway. Because it's so useful to learn from, you know, it's quite easy to think, well, I write crime novels, I'm just going to read all the crime novels. But actually, you can learn so much from a really, really good women's fiction novel or from a fantasy novel about developing worlds and characters. And so I think it's really important to read really widely outside your genre. And I've certainly done that a lot more since I sort of played around with my own writing.
Yeah, we tend to actually always read outside our genre if we're writing. Like if we're writing suspense, I won't read suspense. I'll read like memoirs or, you know, something women's fiction and vice versa. So yeah, just because I don't know why. I think maybe just to expand on that. But Julie, I think was there a question?
Yep, there's a question. Well, there's one that came in privately too, that just to me. So a recurring character, so I'll read that one first. Recurring characters. Do you have a recurring character? Do you think you want to do a recurring character in your crime?
It's interesting. Good question. So I often think, while I'm writing a novel, that this is a character I would like to come back to. And when I finish the novel, I feel really quite bereft that I'm leaving them. And I think that's a really good indication. I think you should absolutely, in every novel that you write, a bit of you should think, I should come back to this character, because I think that shows that you're creating someone that feels very real. That feeling doesn't necessarily last. And so I was absolutely convinced after I wrote I See You that my female detective, Kelly, and in fact I can't remember her last name, which just shows you that I've clearly moved on. It's a bit like an ex, you know, it's like a boyfriend that at the time I thought we have to get back together, and now I'm like, whatever, I don't even remember his name. But I was convinced that I would turn her into a series, and actually I've moved on. I've met other people. We just don't have a future together. So there is. I would like to come back to one of my characters, who is Murray in Let Me Lie. So Murray is a retired detective, and actually it's his wife that I really like. He's married to a woman who has bipolar, and they just have a really great relationship. Yeah, I'd love to write more for him. But the thing about having a recurring character, or particularly writing a series, so writing serial crime, like I don't know, like creating Kay Scarpetta or something like that, is that you have to have two different stories in your head whenever you're writing. So you've got the story, you've got the narrative arc of the book that you're writing, and that has to have a satisfying ending for someone that reads it on its own, and it's got to make sense. The whole story's got to make sense for someone who only reads that book. But within that, it's also got to have an overarching story that covers the whole series, which could be 3 books or 8 or 27. And I think to do that is just, you know, it shows so much skill. And I don't know, I don't think I'm ready yet. And I don't think I've met the character that I want to spend all that time with, and that justifies having such a, you know, a huge role to play.
Right, because you do have to love that character. Do you want me to read the other ones, Liz, that are in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it, girl.
So Christine is asking, why did you switch careers from policewoman to writer?
Another very good question. It's a funny story. So I had an appraisal. I was so we have a different rank structure to you guys do, but in the police I was 2 or 3 ranks up, and I was ready to go up another one. So I was preparing for my chief inspector rank, and in order to do that I had to have a peer assessment process, something called a 360-degree feedback. So it's when everyone you work with fills out an anonymous survey about you, and then you get a report that says what you're like to work with. And it's quite exposing, but very, very useful. So I had this report done, and I read it, and I was terrified of it, but I was absolutely delighted to get this really great feedback that said that basically I was brilliant to work with. Okay, I was really confident and creative, and my doors always open, and I was always full of good ideas, and I listened, and, like, you know, all the good adjectives. And I was so proud of it that I took it home to show my husband, and my husband read it, and he said, "Yeah, this is really good. Who's this woman?" and it was a real, you know how people have kind of their epiphany moments, and that was mine, because I realized that, like a lot of people, and like a lot of women in particular, I used all the best bits of me, the smiley bits, the energetic bits, for work, and then I brought the leftovers home to heat up for my family. And it was really quite sobering, because this wasn't what I wanted my life to be like. I loved my career. I can't tell you how much I loved being, not just being a police officer, but being on the career path that I was on, which would have seen me move into a level where I could have made a genuine difference in British policing. I loved it so much, but we had a very difficult time. We'd lost one of our twins. We had a very, very sick child who had survived but had a hole in his heart and had various problems. I had then fallen pregnant with another set of twins unexpectedly. So I was, you know, I had 3 kids under 3. And it was really difficult. And so I took 2 years out. That was my decision after this appraisal. I would take 2 years out, and I would settle the kids into school, and then I would go back to work. But I had to earn money still. And so while I was away from the police, the only thing I knew how to do was write. And I wrote for magazines and newspapers, and I wrote for businesses. I wrote social media copy. I wrote about soap and socks and anything that anyone would pay me to write about. And at the same time, I wrote I Let You Go. And then I was very lucky that I Let You Go sold 1 million copies, and I've been a full-time author ever since, and never went back to the police.
Any desire to, is there any inkling in the back of you?
No. Do you know what? I still, I get kind of wistful. I was going to say envious. It's not envy at all, and particularly not in the current climate, because my God, things are hard.
Or a mess, right?
Yeah, they really are. They really are a mess. But I tell you what I miss, is I miss the feeling of making a real difference. And for all that, you know, I can sort of justify that, oh, books make a difference, and
they do,
and they do, but I miss that sense that I have been that difference between someone feeling terrified and now someone feeling safe.
Yeah, it's a social part of it. That's social,
yeah.
The social justice part of it. Yeah,
Absolutely. So that, you know, that's hard, but I do other stuff. I do voluntary work, and I do charity work, and I fill that void in a different way now.
Well, that was another question, because Vicky has a question, but it sounds like your hands are full too, though. But what's your favorite thing to do when you aren't writing, and do you have a hobby?
I do. Do you know what? I was talking about hobbies with a friend recently, because do you remember when you were a kid, like particularly when you were maybe 14 and you were in French class or something, and you had to talk about your hobbies, and it was all kind of, I like to go to the cinema, j'aime bien aller au cinéma, and then you get to be an adult, particularly when you have kids, and suddenly I think your hobbies sort of like disappear. You don't have, like, your kids are your hobbies. And for quite a while I didn't have anything, because writing, which was a real love and a real hobby, had become my job, and it was like, what else do I do? But in the last so I'll be 44 in 9 days time, and in the last 4 years I have found so many hobbies. So wild swimming is my big passion. So I love to swim in the lake. I live in a town with a big lake, biggest natural lake in Wales. It's very cold all year round, and I swim all year round, and I don't wear a wetsuit. So I love swimming in December when it's 2 degrees. I don't know what degrees centigrade is in Fahrenheit, but it's quite cold, just above freezing. So I do that a lot. And what else do I like to do? I like horse riding, so I've been horse riding lately with my daughter. So yeah, I do. I like to be outdoors, I think, cycling and running. I used to be quite crafty, but I haven't done many craft things lately. But I think hobbies are really important, and I do think that we kind of lose them a little bit. Liz, do you have hobbies?
Well, I think to your earlier point, during our book tour, the event, we got that question a couple times, and my hobby was watching my daughter play soccer. So I might need to, I might need to start going swimming again, or play pickleball or something. I mean, I read, and then I like to cook. But I mean, you know, my kids are teenagers, and I think my hobby might be driving them places. Can that be a hobby?
Yes.
Driving them to the beach. I think I spend most of my life doing that. But I would love to get back into horseback. You're like doing all my dream hobbies. You're like my hero.
I think I hit that kind of that 40 midlife crisis thing, and my daughter, so this is my daughter who has autism, really loves animals, has this great connection with them, struggles a little bit socially, and so she doesn't want to be in a horse riding class with anyone else. And so I said, well, I'll do it. You know, I rode for years when I was a kid. God, it's a good workout. Like, I'm finding muscles I didn't know existed.
Absolutely. I used to ride too. You're making me want. You're like the third person I'm talking this week that's like riding horses again. Maybe the universe is trying to tell me I need to lease a horse or something. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're about on time, right, Julie? So let's go ahead and wrap this up. One comment, Vicky said, books have kept her sane during the pandemic. Vicky, we're feeling you. I think we're all on the same page. We're all here because we love books. Claire, tell us where we can find you online and on social media.
Well, I'm kind of easy to find. There aren't very many people with my name, so you can pretty much put Clare Mackintosh into Google and you'll come up with at least one of my channels. So I love Instagram. I share lots of pictures on Instagram. I'm Clare Mac Writes. If you like the kind of behind the scenes stuff. So Instagram for me is all about my actual life. So it's my kids, my house, my goat, my sheep, my chickens, my horse riding, and my wild swimming. Twitter is where I talk about books and publishing. So you'll find me there as Clare Mackintosh. And then on Facebook, I run a book club. So if you look for the Clare Mackintosh Book Club, we read a different book every month, we talk about it, and we have loads of literary chat in the Facebook group. So one of those channels, and I'd love to see you there.
Love that.
I'm going to find you at the book club. That's
I know,
really
I was
cool.
just thinking the same thing. I was like, okay, you got a couple new people there.
Yeah, I love a good Facebook book club. And you guys can find Lisa and I on Instagram at Lisa and Liz. We're at Facebook at Liz Fenton and Lisa Steinke, or you can find us everywhere at lizandlisa.com. So Claire, it was so fun talking to you, and I can't believe how chipper you are at midnight.
It's closer to 1 a.m. now.
I am buzzing. You know that irritating friend who, when you want to go to bed, is all kind of like, "Let's go clubbing, let's push on."
Yeah.
I've come out the other side. I'm wired now.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And now we're gonna leave you.
I know, right? You're gonna have to like call up somebody.
Wake my husband up now and say, "Come on,
oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, hopefully we'll be in a different world next year when the new book comes. Is the new book coming out next year?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll make it across and back to see us in La Jolla again, and we'll be all meeting in person after that.
I hope so, because you know, I dragged my entire family to La Jolla purely because I fell in love with it when I came on my book tour.
It's a good place. Jojo Moyes, when she comes, she makes sure that Warwick's is the last place on her tour, so she can stay for 3 or 4 days afterwards.
That is a good tip.
So think about that.
Actually, yeah, you have to come, and Lisa and I will come down to the store. And it's, like I said, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today, and just, can't wait to see your book soar, and we're just so happy that you took the time to come talk to us.
It's brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. And thank all of you for coming. It's been great to see you here.
Yep. Right. Okay, we'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.